We're now going to look at rounding to decimal places, so many decimal places, and so many significant figures. Let's start with decimal places. If you look here, we have got a number which is at the moment got 3 decimal places. Decimal places means figures that are after the decimal point. So the first decimal place is 3, second decimal place is 6, third decimal place is 8. So this figure as it stands at the moment has 3 decimal places. And what I've been asked to do is to round it to 1 decimal place. In maths, we commonly write that as D.P, 1 decimal place. Right, now if you imagine this number line, okay, and I'm starting at 84.3 because that would take 1 decimal place, and I've gone up to 84.4. Now, because I've got to round to 1 decimal place, that means I'm only allowed to write 1 figure after the decimal point. And that is my choice. Is it going to be 84.3 or is it going to be 84.4? Well, if you actually placed this whole number on this line, if I go right to the middle of this line, you can see that that would be 84.35. Right in the middle of 84.3 and 84.4. So 84.368 is clearly around this stage, somewhere in here. So it is closer to 84.4 than it is 84.3. So if I am rounding that number to 1 decimal place, I'm going to round it to 84.4. Now I would not expect you to keep drawing these lines to round numbers. There is a slightly quicker way. The way I do it is I go to the number, and what I do is, because I'm rounding this to 1 decimal place, I put an imaginary line there in my head, and I say to 1 decimal place, either the answer is going to stay at 84.3, or I'm going to go up 1 digit to 84.4. What determines whether it stays there or goes up is that next figure. If that next figure is a 5 or more, then we need to increase that digit. Quite clearly here, the numbers are 6. So, to 1 decimal place, the answer would be 84.4. Let's look at these 3 numbers. Let's do some rounding. Let's start with this number here, 783.1428. At the moment, it's to 4 decimal places. I'm suddenly just going to round it to 1 decimal place. So what do? I find where my first decimal place is. There it is. I put an imaginary line in there so I can see to myself. And I've just got a choice to make. To 1 decimal place, this number is either 783.1 or 783.2. What determines? It's that next digit. That next digit is a 4. Remember, if it's less than 5, we don't need to go up. Picture it on a number line. If you imagine here, this is 783.1. This is 783.2. This number is more along this way. So my final answer to 1 decimal place is 783.1. Look at this next one. 8.2543. I'm going to round it to 1 decimal place. So I stop here. I look at the number next to the 2, which is a 5. Remember, if it's 5 or more, we have to round up. So 8.2, because of that 5, will now round to 1 decimal place to be 8.3. If I was to do this one to 2 decimal places, notice what I'd do. I wouldn't draw my line there. My imaginary line would stop there. 2 decimal places means 2 figures after the decimal point. I would then look at the 3rd digit this time, because remember I'm rounding now to 2 decimal places. It's not 5 or more, so to 2 decimal places, my answer would have been 8.25. Let's look at this last number here. 81.984. Let's do 2 decimal places first. So I'm drawing my line after 2 figures. That's there. I'm looking at the number next to the 8, which is a 4. So when I am rounding, I don't need to change that digit because it's less than 5. So to 2 decimal places, that would be 81.98. Now, slightly harder is when I start looking at rounding this to 1 decimal place. So let's just have a look. Move this line now. I'm going to now put my line in after 1 figure after the decimal point. That's 81.9. And I've got a decision to make. Do I need to round up or do I need to keep it the same? This digit here is 5 or more, which means I have to round up. And in your head, just think about it. If I'm rounding 81.9 up, the next number it would round to would be 82.0. So I'm increasing that digit, but remember, you can view it as a bit like carrying onto the next digit as well. So 81.9 to 1 decimal place would be 82.0. You must put that 0.0 just to show that you have rounded to 1 decimal place, and that is the digit when it is rounded to 1 decimal place. What we're now going to do is looking at rounding now to what we call significant figures. So what does a significant figure actually mean? Well, if I want to round to 1 significant figure, that means I'm taking my number and I can only write 1 figure, okay, which is non-zero. All the other numbers will be 0, but that 1 figure, okay, is a non-zero figure. So if we start with the number 87. So what I've got to do is write just 1 non-zero figure. But I will also have to keep what we call place value. So if you look, 87, I'm either going to write 80, 80, or 90, 90. The one I'm going to choose is a bit like decimal places like we've just done. What is 87 closest to? Is it closer to 90 or is it closer to 80? Well, quite clearly, it's closer to 90. But if we do it in a similar way that we've just done decimal places, if I want to write this number to 1 significant figure, imagine just putting a line there, because that is my first significant figure. This is my second, so this number has 2 significant figures at the moment. So I'm rounding now to 1 significant figure. And because this number is 5 or more, I must round up. If it was less than 5, then the number would stay the same. So 87 to 1 significant figure would go to 90. Let me do it for the number 4,328. 1 significant figure, so I stop there. This number at the moment has 4 significant figures because the 4 numbers are non-zero. So that's my first significant figure, which is 4. I look at the number next door. I do not need to round up because it is less than 5. So 4,328 would go to 4,000. There is only 1 non-zero figure. If we look at this one, if you look at this number 0.0753, let's work out first how many significant figures it's actually got. Well, it's actually got 3. The 7, the 5 and the 3 are non-zero figures. So this has 3 significant figures as it stands at the moment. I'm now going to round it to 1 significant figure. So what have I got to do? Find where the first significant figure is. The first significant figure is the 7. I stop. I look at the number next door, which is a 5. Remember, if it's 5 or more, we have to round up. So the answer would be 0.08. You do not have to fill in these 2 zeros here, okay? Because it's not, if you think about it, doing any good, but it's also about place value. There's no need to have those zeros there. Here, there certainly was, okay? We can't turn 87, okay, into 8. That's why we needed that 0 to represent that we've now got no units, okay, because we're rounding to one significant figure. So if we look at this number here, 0.000088, it has two significant figures as it stands at the moment. I'm going to round to one significant figure, so I stop there. I make a decision on this 8, it's 5 or more. So when I round the 8 up, it goes to a 9. So to one significant figure, that's 0.000, and that 8 has moved into a 9. So the final answer, 0.00009. Thank you. Right, and we've already looked at rounding numbers to one significant figure, but really we can round now to 2, 3, 4, 5 significant figures. It's our choice what we want to round the numbers to. So we're just going to have a little bit of practice at rounding these numbers this time to two significant figures. So I took this number, 3,724. I'm looking for the first two digits that are non-zero, so that's 3 and 7. And then I'm making a decision. Am I going to round that 7 up to make an 8, to make it 3,800? Or am I going to keep it the same and make it 3,700? Remember, if you imagined it on a big number line, this is clearly nearer to 3,700 than it is 3,800. But if you remember the technique, go to the digit alongside the one that you're interested in, and I'm interested in the 7 because it's two significant figures. Is it 5 or more? It's not, it's less than 5, so I don't have to round up. So my final answer is 3,700. If you look at this next number, just to remind you, this number as it stands at the moment has 3 significant figures. These zeros are not significant. So if I'm going to round this one to 2 significant figures, that's my first significant figure, that's my second, I stop. I make a decision. Remember, if it's 5 or more, we have to round up. So the number that I'm going to round up is the 5. It's going to round up to the 6. So to 2 significant figures, that's 0.086. Finally, there's a little bit of a catch to significant figures. This number here, you're probably thinking, has only 2 significant figures, the 3 and the 7. It hasn't. It has actually got 5 significant figures. Why has it got 5 significant figures? It's because these zeros are sandwiched between 2 numbers, which all of a sudden makes them significant. So there is a slight catch that you need to be very, very wary of. If the zeros are sandwiched between 2 non-zero numbers, they become significant numbers. So if I just dropped a digit in there, all of a sudden, those zeros would have become significant. So if I take this number here now, and I suddenly decide I'm going to round it to 4 significant figures, there's my first, there's my second, there's my third, there's my fourth, so I stop there. That 7 basically means I've got to round that digit up because it's 5 or more. So to 4 significant figures, this number would be 30.01.